I'm excited to talk with you and to hear your perspectives and questions and insights on artificial intelligence writ large. We'll spend a lot of time talking about generative AI in particular. Melanie, I know that we'll have an announcement later in the session about an aligned AI presentation coming up next week. So I want to make sure we give you time for that. And also, please, if you don't mind, giving me a couple of time checks throughout the session. That would be awesome. Maybe when we have like 30 minutes left, and again, when we have 10 or 15, and I'll make sure we get as much time for Q&A. Thank you, Melanie. I appreciate that. So I was telling Melanie before we started today's call that I spent quite a bit of time going back and forth on this presentation, tearing it apart and rebuilding it, because part of me said, let me just sort of focus on tools and strategies for using those tools. But a bigger part of me said, look, you all are smart people. You've been talking about this. I think based on what I've seen from extension writ large, you are on the bubble and ahead of the curve in many respects on AI adoption. Frankly, in the corporate world, I think with the exception of maybe the largest, global companies, there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of hesitation. There's a lot of uncertainty as to how to proceed in this space. And so I think you have a great team with a really great head on your shoulders. And so what I want to spend most of our time discussing today and getting your perspectives on is this idea of the right mindsets and the right ethical framework within extension to be thinking about these AI tools. And the reason for that, I will sort of elaborate on in just a moment, but in a very brief way, I, in my consulting business, since I started about 2 years ago, I've been using AI almost from the beginning. It sort of coincided very nicely with the introduction of ChatGPT, which of course AI has been infused in machines and technology for decades, but it was really my first exposure to this kind of tool, and it was eye-opening. And as the months and years have progressed, as you all know, the capacity that these tools have, the just prolific nature of them being everywhere, the, I guess, democratizing force they can potentially become, which is really exciting, and also some of the real challenges or concerns they pose. Those are all things that there is no single arbiter of what is the best way forward. And so I think it's a really tremendous time and place for extension to continue carrying that mantle and consider down to the local level, what do these tools mean for us as extension professionals? And then how can we prepare our clients? Because I suspect that if things continue to progress in sort of this exponential way, the development of technology, the access to these tools, there are profound repercussions we hardly understand today. And so the more that we can be thinking with this lens that I'm going to share with you, and again, this is subject to revisions and additions and modification by all of you, I am hopeful that it will position us to maximize the benefits and mitigate the risks. So with that being said, let me go ahead and move to the next slide. So really the learning objectives for our session today are threefold, right? First, I want to talk a little bit about Gen AI opportunities and threats, and talk about why I feel, based on my experience, living and working with these tools, as many of you have, and being an observer and an aggregator of this kind of information, why it's so important that we're talking about ethics with AI today. Secondly, I want to spend some time talking about surveying the landscape, right? And I won't spend a lot of time. I'll give you some sense as to the tools that I'm finding interesting or valuable. Many of them, if not most of them, you've probably heard of, but a few might be new, and hopefully they can be helpful to you. And then, talk a little bit about resources, like who might we listen to, follow, etc., if we're interested in really understanding this space and how it could transform the industries, the specific segment of education or research that you do. And then finally, at the end of our presentation today, I will have a series of questions that I think would be really valuable as a starting framework, whether you've been using AI tools for years or whether you're just beginning to think about how this translates to your local communities or the clients you serve. These questions sort of will create an ethical framework that you can start to build activities, services, outreach, etc., and hopefully feel confident that you're doing so in a way that honors not only your desire to be an efficient and productive employee or professional or leader, but even more important than that, that you're doing so in a very human-centered way that honors your clients and that honors the rich history and impact of extension. All right, so let's dive in. I'm going to start us off with 3 quotes. These are all published recently, some as early as recently as today. And this sort of frames up why I think it's so important that we spend our time together talking about ethics. Now, in visiting with Melanie and hearing others, I suspect you all have some excitement around this space, and you also have some serious hesitation or reservations, just like I do. And so I want this to be an interactive session. This is not me preaching. I am not an expert. I am just someone who spends time studying this space and using these tools in my business and thinking about how to advise my clients, because many of them are communicators. Many of them have an education and outreach component to what they do. And many of them don't know exactly all of the pieces and where they should proceed. And so I serve as a sounding board. I would love for you to type questions into the question function here in Zoom or comments into the chat. They could be, questions that you want to make sure we get to later in the session. It could be something in response to or reaction to what you're seeing on the screen or something that I've said. And we'll try to get to as many of those as possible today. So please chime in early and often. Okay, so this is the first quote. Ethan Mollick, many of you are probably familiar with. He has a new book out recently called Co-Intelligence. He also has a Substack newsletter that's extremely popular called One Useful Thing. And in today's, literally today's newsletter, Ethan had this really profound article about the fact that as these AI tools come online, as large language frontier models become more, vast and powerful, each of us as professionals, especially those who are experts in their field, which applies to everybody here in this room, you have an opportunity to really run your own research and development operation. Dr. Mollick makes the point that many people today are really just using AI tools at a surface level. And what better people to be experimenting with new use cases, developing deeper prompts, really understanding how to stretch these tools to their limit in the best way possible, really should fall to those who know their domain better than anyone and can then share those insights with others. So taking this quote, Mollick writes, quote, "For those of us outside the corporate world, the mission of discovering latent or hidden, sort of unknown as of today expertise that is possible to glean from AI and sharing it is even more urgent compared to the business world," which is pretty profound if you think about it. He says, "Realizing the benefits of AI and mitigating the harms, which we will also talk about today, requires people to understand when and how to use it." So there is a special need, and again, this is someone who comes from the world of academia and research, who's saying, look, we as professors, as researchers, as educators, need to be at the forefront of figuring out how to use these tools for good and balance risks, etc. Okay, second quote. This is someone you probably know, and I won't say you love, but you probably at least are aware of, Elon Musk, right? The founder of deep role in Twitter, SpaceX, Tesla, etc. And he is also arguably a provocateur, right? So take what he says with a grain of salt, but it's interesting and in the public square nonetheless. He says, quote, "My guess is that we'll have AI that is smarter than any one human, probably around the end of next year." This was earlier this year, so he's talking about end of 2025, so within the next 18 months or so. And then the Financial Times also said that he was reported to have said that by the end of this decade, so by 2030, the capabilities of AI will probably be greater than that of all of humanity combined. So again, this is not just something that you're using to save a few dollars or to write posts for LinkedIn. This is something that profoundly can change all of the economy and world history if people like Elon Musk are to be believed, which we can make a separate conversation. But nonetheless, an interesting thing from someone who is very financially well-resourced and deeply integrated into all of these tech tools and has been for decades. Final quote from the Marketing AI Institute, summarizing a recent International Monetary Fund study, found that 40% of jobs across the globe could be affected by the rise of AI. And then further, a full 60% of them will be in high-income nations. Overall, the research paints a picture of big winners and big losers with little space in between. So what I want to stress today is that while the public discourse around AI feels like it's very much like all or nothing, right? Either this is way overhyped and it's going to be a big bust and maybe we'll gain some productivity benefits out of it, but nothing more, all the way to AI threatens the future of the human species. I would argue that the best place for extension and for myself and other sort of pragmatic human beings who want to use technology for good is sort of this middle ground, right? Between those two extremes. Nonetheless, this is a tool that's extremely different from anything we've ever been exposed to in many respects. And so it is appropriate to be cautious. It's appropriate to ask questions. And I would argue it's appropriate to take a step back and say, what does this look like? If we play out this scenario, how does this help? What are possible risks? And how do we build our AI strategy or the way in which we use these tools in our day-to-day work to do the most good with humans at the center of that, right? Okay. I see a couple comments come in and I really appreciate that. So let me just take a step back and look at those real quick before we move into the next question. I see, yes, thank you, Melanie. Okay, so we'll come back to this question. Thank you, Pat, regarding quality of AI for simultaneous interpretation into other languages. We'll come back to that. Thank you for that. So as we're setting the stage here, I want to ask first and have you all either type into the chat or that would probably be the easiest way. You know, from your perspective, as you look out, 1 to 2 years, not very far at all into the future, what do you see as the biggest opportunity from artificial intelligence for people here in the U.S., right? I'm just talking about the average American, right? A resident, regardless of where you live, whether rural or urban. What are some of the key opportunities or benefits that you see coming from these tools over the next few years? I'll give you a minute to think about it and chime in the chat. Awesome. Jennifer, thank you. Getting to solutions faster. Absolutely. So using these tools as a brainstorming partner, using them as a way to sort of strategically think through decisions and maybe get some counterpoints and really sharpen your argument or decision-making strategy. Other thoughts or comments on opportunities? Ah, nice, Mark. Absolutely. So I expect the tech experts in the room to lean into coding. Absolutely. Being able to build apps, being able to build websites, or you name it, you can come up with it, right? Using AI. That's awesome. Brianna says creating lesson plans and curriculum. Absolutely. Karen, speed and accuracy with which data can be collected and shared. Yes. Patty, checklists for research calls for proposal, budget justifications. Fantastic. Yes. And you're right. There are absolutely limitations, right? You have to give it a lot of dialogue to get the answers. I myself have experienced that, right? Even doing something as simple as taking a transcript and using that to become a case study or describe some work that I've been doing. There's a lot of human layers of editing that I have to do on top of it to really say what I want it to say. Absolutely. I see learning or finding shortcuts for new tools, automating emails. Yes. I mean, I think I see a blend of like helping us refine strategy, right? Helping us refine tools or outputs that we're developing for our clients, for internal uses, and also a recognition that, there is a need to understand how to use these tools to get the most out of them, including using that human layer of creative thinking and decision making. So all of those are excellent thoughts. I appreciate your sharing that. Okay, now let's look at the flip side of the coin, the darker side of the coin, which is what is the biggest threat that you see from AI for those of us here in the United States, again, in that same time frame of 1 to 2 years, give or take. I'll give you a second to think about that and chime in. Some of you may be saying, wow, where do I begin? Okay, hate propaganda, absolutely. Bias of multiple kinds. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Jody. Jennifer, the duplication of ideas, yes, very derivative, right? And not only repeating or rehashing ideas based on the models or the data that's been used to train these models, but also, right, taking people's original work and using it without any restitution or financial compensation to the creators, right? That's a big concern as well. Misinformation, yes, absolutely. Sarah, becoming lazy and dependent. Yes, Pat, absolutely. Jody, getting lazy. Karen, exclusion of human ethical consideration, 100%. Yes, Paula, how IP is defined, right? Whose intellectual property, is it sufficient for an AI tool to just take that wholesale, to pay some sort of a subscription fee, or, again, lots of unanswered questions. Amy, people without access or knowledge of how to use AI will be at a disadvantage, creating a larger digital divide. Absolutely. This has a real potential to leave people behind, right? If we're not able to get to as many people in the population as possible here in the US and around the world. So all of these are great. I can tell you all have been thinking very deeply about this. I'm not surprised at all. Okay. And then the final question, which again, this is all speculative, but I think it helps sort of free up ideas and thoughts in our own minds. From your perspective, which of these scenarios is likely to be most true in the next 1 to 2 years? Now, it's likely that we'll see a little bit of both, but what's going to win out, at least in the short term here? Do you think it's going to be the opportunities that we'll recognize, the threats? If you want to take the middle ground, you can, but I'm really curious sort of where you fall on this question of immediate benefits or threats to society. And it's a difficult question, right? We simply don't know. Thank you, Jennifer. We both simultaneously, we will see the benefit and then recognize the pitfall. Yeah, well said. I think there's a lot of racing forward without sort of thinking through the ramifications. Mark, it's just an amplifier. Great point. So it's really just a way to highlight and amplify existing trends or things that we see in society today, right? Things that are positive and also things that are a challenge. Lack of trust in institutions, lack of trust in science, those kinds of things. I also see, let's see, Karen, I'm concerned that educational type jobs could become a bit obsolete. Sure, if you're able to use AI as a tutor or access any information and this sort of universal consciousness, what does that mean for education? Absolutely. My wife is an educator, so I'm very empathetic to that question. Human behavior will always be involved for good, neutral, and bad. Yeah, that's exactly, I think Jody's exactly right. The human piece is hard to ignore. And Patty says it's wrong a lot right now, and that's very true, right? So we should be aware of its the benefits and the risks, right? And finally, before we move on, Jesse says, I'll err on the side of opportunity. Safeguards will be developed and implemented. I love your viewpoint, and I really, really hope that is exactly what happens, because I think it's so necessary right now. Thank you, Jesse. Okay, so let's go in a little deeper here. And again, you know about me, so I'm not going to dwell on that slide. Well, excuse me, my slideshow just jumped out here. Okay, here we go. So why are we talking about this now? I think it's probably apparent based on the quotes we just looked at and a lot of the comments that were already in the chat. It's first the convergence of this ubiquitous innovation, the plummeting cost, so more people have access to this. More chips are being produced. I think NVIDIA now is like the #2 largest company by market cap in the world, second to perhaps Apple or one of those kinds of companies. So it's very large. And there are certainly bottlenecks, right? There are supply chain questions around how much bigger can these models get based on current manufacturing capacity and the very specific nature of the tools needed. If you ever are interested in diving into this topic, the book Chip Wars is really powerful, both as sort of the history of how these chips that power AI were developed, and then sort of the national security implications, the supply chain fragility, those kinds of things. But that's not our topic today. Second, here on the right-hand side in the top corner, spillover of Gen AI into every facet of the economy, right? I think immediately one of the comments maybe Jennifer made earlier was about we're going to sort of race ahead and see these immediate benefits, and then we're going to start to see some of the drawbacks. I think there's probably a lot of truth in that, and I think initially, at least in my space, right, I come from a communications background, especially for marketing organizations, agencies, people that write lots of articles online or blog posts. There is some change starting to happen where human, freelance writers, for example, are being let go, and companies are going in sort of an all-in AI strategy. AI is going to write everything, or we're going to sort of save efficiencies by taking that work in-house. So there is some shrinkage. I don't think it's expansive at this point, but obviously that can change. The third piece is this tech-led race toward artificial general intelligence, which I've not seen a fully clear definition, but basically the idea is building a technology that is superior to a human's ability to do basically any task you could think of. And obviously, if you have clear thoughts or opinions on AGI, feel free to drop that in the chat too. But you have a lot of, again, organizations that are very large, well capitalized, publicly stating that this is sort of a priority mission for them, is to get to this point of this super intelligence. And there are also relatively few regulatory guardrails. Within the past 6 months or so, I believe the EU has come together around some legislation around AI. But again, that's relatively rare compared to what's happening here in the US and beyond, even though there has been some momentum in Congress and in the White House. And then finally, unprecedented access to these cheap tools that really, again, lack a moral and ethical compass, right? If you were to go into ChatGPT or Claude today, there are some limitations on what you could ask, but there are often workarounds to get information that might be biased or discriminatory or potentially dangerous. So there are all of these sort of factors converging, and that makes it really important to start thinking about these ethical principles and building them into our own local organizations, while the rest of the world races to keep up, right, from a regulatory standpoint, from a decision-making standpoint. Okay, so that's where we'll spend our first time, just sort of thinking about the need for ethical guides with the opportunities and threats that we can see today. And everybody loves a good mystery, right? Like I love to be surprised. I love, whodunits, whether it's a book or a movie, and many of you probably do too. The strange part about AI, which many of you, if not all of you, already know, is that we don't exactly understand everything about how AI works today. There's some emerging research, and again, I am not the technical person here. If you have questions, I'm going to put Mark on the spot and say, talk to Mark. I'm sure he knows way more than I do in this space. But there are researchers who are studying how does AI come up with the answers and the responses that it offers. But the bottom line is there is a lot about these tools that are actively in the workplace today that even the people who are building the tools don't fully understand. And so I think it's more of a watch out than something to be afraid of. But I do think it bears appropriate precaution because, again, we want to be able to think clearly and understand the ramifications of these tools. So that begs the question, if there are all of these tremendous tools, they're very powerful, they're unlike things we've seen in the past in many respects, who's going to guide us toward figuring out the way to achieve the best and the greatest opportunities and avoid unintended consequences? And you may not like my answer, but I honestly think it has a lot to do with you and with me. I am not aware of a governing body or an institution at any layer of government or academia or the corporate world in our country or any other that has these answers figured out. Now, there are lots of smart people thinking about it. You can go find books and newsletters and podcasts, and I'll share some of my recommendations later for those things. But at the end of the day, who knows Extension's clients best? You do. Who knows the kinds of opportunities your clients have in their businesses, in their communities, with their family's nutrition or plans for their own personal health? Think of vaccines or think of other kinds of, day-to-day kinds of resources that families seek out to make their lives as productive and healthy as possible. Extension serves those areas and many others. You know what the needs are. You know people's questions, the challenges they face. You also have a very deep understanding of your current capacity to serve those needs and what you need to be successful. And it may be that AI tools can be a tremendous resource source or already are in many cases. There may be other cases where you want to exercise caution and recommend that your client sort of think about the pros and cons of these tools or the limitations or the biases, as we've addressed already on this call. And so this is not just a career-defining moment from my perspective. And again, I don't like to be dramatic. I'm a pragmatist. I've kind of already confessed that. But I do think this is a humanity-defining moment, right? Whether we ever get to so-called AGI or not, there is enough money and smart people and momentum that I think these tools will have ramifications throughout our lifetimes and for the future of society. And I think Extension has just a tremendous opportunity to be a great resource as that journey continues, whether we like it or not, right? These things are underway. All right. So let me present to you what I see as sort of 4 primary views around artificial intelligence. Again, none of this is necessarily new, but maybe it sparks an idea or gives you some added perspective as you're thinking about how to integrate these tools in your own work. The accelerationist perspective basically holds that AI will forever transform humanity for the better, and that the faster we get to that point, the better off everyone is going to be, and any effort to stop it is dangerous, right? And I've heard people go so far as to say that if you don't make these kinds of investments in AI, then you are basically killing people because, for example, if AI were to uncover through data analysis new cures for cancer or heart disease or Alzheimer's, if we can prevent those things with AI, we should do that. And I would wholeheartedly agree. I think where I hesitate perhaps on this viewpoint, myself at least, is that going sort of whole hog into a technology without thinking through the ethical piece creates ethical dilemmas in my mind, right? And I think extension comes at its work from a very human-centered place, a very thoughtful place, a very evidence-driven place. And I don't see that a lot in the accelerationist point of view. So just calling that out, again, if you feel that strongly about that, that is totally your prerogative. But I think from a day-to-day business and an extension taking action perspective, it might not be the most helpful, at least today. Pragmatist is sort of where I land, which is this tech can be a net positive. We have to help society safely steer it. And again, I think extension can be a great resource. More on that in a moment. Alarmist, basically this tech raises more questions than answers. There have been several high-profile examples of people leaving big tech companies recently and founding their own research initiatives or calling on society to pump the brakes because they believe, A, we've already arrived at AGI, but it's being, hidden from public view. That feels a little conspiratorial to me. But I do also understand that the concerns that are being raised and applaud those who are trying to be more thoughtful in the corporate space. And then extinctionist, I think, is the sort of the opposite end of accelerationist, which is AGI is going to become so powerful that it eventually wipes out humanity because it's able to, basically kill the off switch and, herald our demise. And very scary to think about, makes great movies. I hope that's not the case. And I don't think it's necessarily terribly productive to only focus on that at the expense of these other perspectives, especially on the pragmatist side. Okay, so you've heard my spiel. Let's talk about what, if we take the pragmatist point of view just for the purposes of our conversation today, what might ethical AI use look like at a very high level? And as I've studied this and thought about this use in my own business, and I'm sure you've thought through many of these things as well, humans remain in the driver's seat, right? I saw that several times in the chat. Secondly, humans are in the driver's seat and they have the necessary training, support of their organization, of society at large, to help them learn those tools, get the resources they need and train on them. And again, understand the trade-offs, like when do I use it, when do I not? How do I stay involved in the process to get the information I need and do no harm, as doctors often take their oath. And then finally, I think it's also going to take, beyond the individual, beyond the organizational level, there does have to be this sort of whole of society effort. And again, how we get there, I don't know. And many of you probably have way better ideas than I do. But, corporate, government, social system involvement, financially, technical resources to navigate this transition that we're going through as a society, I think will be really important. I'm going to pause and take a quick look in the chat. Oh, excellent. Mark says he's happy to answer questions. Thank you, Mark. Mark also points out, importantly, another argument for the accelerationist perspective is that bad actors are not slowing down. It's a great point, Mark. So what Mark raises is this idea that whether it's nation states or terrorist organizations or individuals in their basement, trying to build, bioweapons from, publicly available data that AI can parse and, give them ingredients to weapons. If we sort of delay or pump the brakes on our path toward AGI or greater artificial intelligence capabilities, then the bad actors aren't going to stop. No one, they're going to ignore pumping the brakes and just keep going. That's a really important point. So there's a lot of truth to that, right? I suspect that the horse is out of the barn, so to speak. And so there has to be this balance of progress as rapidly as possible and done through an ethical framework. Okay, what does this all mean to you, right? You've all been very patient with me. I think that this boils down to 4 key categories. I'm sure you could think of many others, but these are the ones that came to me as I was thinking about my experience working with Extension, having served on an Extension council. Okay, what qualifies Extension to help your clients navigate generative AI? First of all, it's community, right? Gen AI's effects are going to be felt first in local communities, right? This is not a tool that's just it's sort of existential, right? It's not like my organization adopts this and I'm not involved. The organizations that are going to be successful using AI tools, the organizations that are going to be making the decisions of the future are going to be using these tools and expecting their team to do that as well. That could look like people having to rework their job description, right? Learn new skills. Unfortunately, in some cases, it may mean that people lose their jobs because fewer workers are needed. On the other hand, the flip side is that maybe that empowers people who lose their jobs to be entrepreneurial, right? To have greater access to tools and knowledge and resources that Gen AI makes possible. All of those things that could happen in the future are things that Extension is very well positioned, given the diverse areas in which you have expertise, given your connectivity to the heartbeat of those communities that you serve. That positions you extremely well. It also requires a little bit different thinking, right? Because you're not just serving them with information, you're helping them engage with that information in new and different ways that are highly customizable. But again, systems and processes can be taught and trained. And again, you'll think of new ways to use this that have never even occurred to me or your peers. Second is education, right? Widespread AI training within organizations and just in society in general are sorely lacking from everything that I've studied. In all but maybe the largest companies, right? And so it strikes me that education is so core to what you do at Extension that you are going to be really well equipped to provide internal training and resourcing. Mark and others are already actively doing that and doing exactly the right thing, which is speaking about it, providing you with insights, helping you understand how these tools integrate into the work of Extension. And frankly, you're creating your own tools as well. I know Melanie we'll talk a little bit more about Mark and team's presentation next week on some of the chatbots and other things that are being built. It's really, really cool. And it's unlike things I'm seeing anywhere else in my client base. So I'm really proud of you for that and excited to see where you take those tools that I think are really going to make a profound positive difference in the lives of Extension professionals. 2 other factors I'll call out. One is time horizon. So Extension has boots on the ground today, right? You have 32,000 professionals, highly educated, highly skilled, highly passionate about the people they serve. And based on, again, my observation of the marketplace, we don't have years to get ready for this, right? These things are happening already. They are going to, I think, if the technology grows exponentially, I think the impact on society probably will be exponential as well, and probably in ways we've never even considered. So the fact that you have boots on the ground resources, you have the ability to quickly gain traction and momentum. Again, I know every system has its complexities. It's never as easy as you think it's going to be, right? I'm thinking of my own experience managing grants. It sounds easy. We're going to provide these deliverables on this time frame. We're going to report our progress and we'll have the impact that we hope for, right? It's never that simple. But the reality is that you are as good or probably better positioned than just about anyone else, including in the corporate world, to make a difference because of the fact that you have all of the values we've already described. And there are going to be opportunities for you, whether through funding opportunities or through active projects you're already leading, to begin integrating AI and also think about AI training for your clients. Then finally, reality, right? I think among its many virtues, Extension is focused on evidence-based practice, right? We're going to take the best research and insights from the university, the academic level, and we're going to translate that for a variety of clients who can benefit from that, right? We're not going to just stop at publishing journal articles. We're going to actually make sure people can use this information today. And there is so much puffery and sort of politicizing of this space, right? You have companies very aggressively competing in the market. Again, that's capitalism. So that can have many great benefits, right? You have greater innovation, people challenging each other. I think you also run the risk of scaring people unnecessarily when these tools can be really beneficial. You can also run the risk of saying, hey, everything's going to be awesome, when in reality, there are probably going to be some not awesome things that AI creates. Extension sort of holds that middle ground. And so I think the more you can begin integrating this into your internal conversations, and the more that you can start helping people think through new tools that are going to help farmers, for example, or new resources that can help families better manage their nutrition, or whatever the case might be, right? Manage their finances. It will be great to see how Extension can sort of train and educate and equip on those tools, and also help give society frameworks for thinking about these things, and not just saying, hey, go all in, use this, hope you have a great success, but really thinking about, use it in these cases, recognize these limitations, and here at Extension, we can help you with the following 5 things. If you ever run into problems or you're unsure, we want to be a sounding board. We want to help guide you through this new world. I think, again, those are just examples that I'm sort of throwing spaghetti at a wall, but I can envision Extension immediately being able to provide some of those real tangible benefits to your clients. So let me pause for a moment and ask, how are you today within your component of Extension preparing to integrate Gen AI? Some of you are probably well down the road. Others may be still exploring. So maybe in 1 or 2 words, just share sort of where you're at on that journey, just so I can get a sense of where we're at in the room. I'll take a drink of water and see what comes in on the chat. Beginner, awesome. Pat, welcome. That's great to hear. Karen's exploring, fantastic. Thank you, Karen. It's also a really exciting and sometimes overwhelming place to be, right? That's where I'm at. Waiting for administration to give us the go-ahead. Yes, there are almost invariably decisions, leadership, again, the implications are so large that it's going to take some time for organizations to figure out which tools do we allow, what are the settings, how are the ways you can or can't use these tools. Totally get that, Jamie. Using it for data analysis, Jesse. Stephanie's exploring, Calandria's exploring, Kimmy's exploring. Only heard cautionaries from leadership. Okay, totally fair. Jody, I understand there's a lot of concern out there. No integration. Yes, Mark says don't wait for leadership, right? So even if you're not using this in an official formal capacity, right, you always need to honor your organization's technology rules, right, ethics guidelines. There are, to Mark's point, lots of opportunities to be using this in your individual life, or even just experimenting, right? Take 15 minutes a day or a week and just give it a shot, right? Hop on ChatGPT, read a newsletter, listen to a podcast, right? Just, I think keeping an open mind and just being aware is so important. I can remember when COVID happened, I wanted to just consume as much information as possible. I had no experience with global pandemics. Many of you probably didn't either. And so I think just being curious is really a great starting point. Okay, experimenting with uses, Reagan says, finding some good uses and always learning. Love that. Guidelines related to fact sheet authorship. Awesome, Amy. Jennifer's fact-checking AI-generated information. Yes, super important. We'll talk about at least one tool on that standpoint that might be helpful. Jody, I'm using it even though we don't have integration yet. Yes, totally. I mean, if you look at survey data from the American public, the vast majority of Americans have at least tried one of these tools. And many of them are using it whether their company has said thumbs up or not, which again, that's a whole nother ethical argument. But I think Mark's right that you can be doing a lot on your own. Grammar check. Yes, I found that ChatGPT in particular can be great, taking a transcript with lots of incomplete sentences and basically saying, I want you to give me the exact same words here, but just add punctuation and make sure everything is clear and that those sentences come through. So yeah, I love that. Grammarly, awesome. Federal Demonstration Partnership University members are worried about IP, especially with ChatGPT. I totally resonate with that, Patty. I've been exploring, I've written several nonfiction books, but moving into sort of the fiction space just for fun in my own free time. And the fiction writing, I think the author community in general is very much, especially on the fiction side of things, very, if you use AI or you confess to that, or you are found to be using AI, which is also very difficult to determine, basically you're banished, right? You're not part of that community, and so there are some rifts I think beginning to see in society, and understandably, right? People's creative property, people's IP, has often been taken whole cloth, and there's no today process for how do we handle that. Alicia says making written communication more concise. Yes, I love its ability to paraphrase, summarize, synthesize. 100%. Okay, great insights from all of you. Um, so I'm going to skip this extension colleagues. I think you all sort of addressed how you're using this or not using it today, how you're thinking about it. I am curious if you're doing anything today to prepare your clients for AI's impact. Or are your clients asking you questions, right? And I have a hypothesis, but I'm curious what I see in the chat. So I'll give you a second to respond to that question of how this is impacting your clients or how you're thinking about today. Jennifer, thanks for your comment. You raise a great point. Basically every tool on your desktop computer, on your phone, increasingly is going to be embedded with AI. So, like, how do we figure out which tools are okay? That's a really great question. Um, and and how do we advise people on that, right? I am afraid I don't have a clear answer for you today. I guess what I would say is, I think as a former journalist, what I like to do is sort of pay attention to these companies that are creating these tools in the public square. What decisions are they making, right? So we've seen some high profile examples of large language models that have biased output of, you know, AI generated images or videos or text that is racist, for example, or things that are untrue. Or you see companies, again, to the points that have been raised, taking articles from the New York Times or the Washington Post and integrating those into their models without permission. So again, you're starting to see licensing of deals. I think Wiley, the book publishing company, recently announced a licensing deal with a large language model. They didn't specify who. But is that enough, right? Is it enough to just make a multi-million-dollar payment and then be done with it and just use that in perpetuity? It raises a lot of questions. Okay, lots of really good comments in the chat. And yeah, Pat says, do people even know when AI is being used? There's a guy named Christopher Penn who blogs about AI, and one of his things I really appreciate about his work is that he always adds to his newsletters and blogs a disclosure, right? 90% of this article was written by a human and 10% with AI, or all of this article was written by a person. His position is that because of legislation coming out of Europe that will probably spread to other places like the United States, it's important to start disclosing earlier rather than later to avoid the potential need to take down all of that content and republish it with clarity on where things came from. And frankly, I think it's also often the right thing to do, right? Helping people understand how those tools were integrated in your work process. Yes, it adds a step. Yes, it adds time, but it can also be really, again, build that integrity in that human relationship. Okay, so I know there's a lot more to go, and we have about, what do we have here? About 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for your questions as we get toward the end. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about resources. So Melanie has graciously agreed to share this presentation with you after our session today. These are the resources that I often use to. There are others, but these are like my top 10 list, so to speak. There are probably more than 10 things on here, maybe less. At any rate, it's a combination of podcasts, newsletters, and books, right? I'm a content hoarder. So if you were to only use one of the things on this list, I think the Artificial Intelligence Show podcast is the place I would start, right? If you're brand new to this space, if you're still exploring, that is my weekly must listen. They also have a great newsletter that I would highly recommend you subscribing to, and I'll link to that in this document. I recommend them because the main hosts of the podcast have been doing AI for years. They also come at it as a background of communicators and marketers, right? And I know Extension does much more than marketing. You do education, you do research, you do outreach. But I think a lot of the skills and the insights they share are transferable to really any industry. And I think because they come at it from a communications lens, it's so integral to what you do at Extension that the way they explain things, for me as a communicator myself, it really resonates. They also do a great job of taking this just dump of information that happens literally every week and helping you think about what's most important. What does this mean in terms of the timeline for how quickly AI could affect your own work, your career, the lives of your clients, and then how to get ready for that. So I highly recommend that. They do education and other things like that, which I've not had the chance to participate in yet, but again, great resource. I mentioned Ethan Mollick earlier, his newsletter. If you want the contrarian perspective, right, the potential risks to society, the derivative nature of generative AI, IP, Ted Gioia, who is a cultural commentator, also on Substack, he is one of two people I pay to subscribe to because I think his insights are so profound. You don't have to agree with it all, but he really does a good job of pulling unique data sets and research and then synthesizing that for you to show how the general public is often resisting AI and why that might not be a bad thing in many cases. So again, I think it's important to get diverse perspectives, and I think he gives some interesting insights. For the nonprofit fundraising side of the work that many of you do, Philip Deng, I've had the privilege of interviewing him. He's the CEO of a startup called Grantable, which is a generative AI technology specifically for grant writing. I've experimented with the free version, mixed results, but I candidly haven't invested enough time in it. But I think it's a really powerful tool. His position is that as AI begins to free up some of our time from more like administrative type tasks, right? Paperwork, developing templates, planning documents, humans will always be involved to some degree, but as we're able to gain some of those efficiencies, we will have more time as a society to invest in philanthropic work, in social impact work. And tools like his are one of many options that can give you greater clarity and really harness the benefits of these AI tools to summarize, to parse deep data sets, right? To look through a massive RFP and find the data points you need. I saw someone was using AI to make checklists for grant proposals, which I think is a tremendous use case. Again, Philip doesn't write very often, but when he does, it's always interesting. I always learn something. Superhuman AI is one of those aggregator newsletters, but they show, you know, what is it capable of doing from a video standpoint, from a photo standpoint. You know, what are the big movers and shakers politically in the corporate world? I think it's a nice, fun read. It doesn't take very long, but always very interesting. And then on the right-hand side is the book piece. If you want a very technical, academic reason for why ethics is so important to this conversation and why humans need to be in the driver's seat, I mentioned Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. Read that for sure. I also recommend Human Compatible by Stuart Russell. A lot of it went over my head, but I really appreciated his harping on this point that we need to continue as a society to distinguish people and machines because both have distinct values that can work together nicely, but we can also get on a slippery slope if we start to attribute human attributes to equipment, to tools, to technology. You may disagree with that, but that's his position. I found it compelling. If you want to see like really wild and wacky like sci-fi stuff that people genuinely believe could happen, Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near. He also has a follow-up volume coming out, I think in July, called The Singularity is Nearer. Again, I don't want to bore you with all these details, but these are very interesting. Homo Deus in a similar way by Yuval Noah Harari really looks ahead at like what is the future of human evolution with machines. And then Mustafa Suleyman is a large language model, pioneer model founder, and really interesting his thoughts on implications for the economy, how society can prepare, etc. Okay, so I mentioned some of those tools, and again, most of these on this list I suspect are nothing new to you. Those that might be, Grantable, again, is a grant writing tool that's AI powered. There is a free version as well as paid. Instrumental is a tool I use in my grants consulting business for grants research. Does a really nice job of pulling together funding opportunities. I'm actually doing some work with Extension Foundation, which has been exciting to sort of harness the capabilities of that tool. But again, grants research, really honing down to specific keywords, phrases, you know, sorting through Form 990s to understand those funders' priorities, whether it's a private foundation or corporate or government. And then For overall research, Research Rabbit is one I played around with. Perplexity is one I consistently hear is basically an aggregator of existing search engines like Google, but with the added benefit that it attributes where it found the information with surprising reliability. I will be candid that I have not really played around with Perplexity, but I continue to hear good things, so I thought I would throw it out here. I heard Grammarly earlier. So again, there are so many tools. If you just Google, AI tools for educators or AI tools for research, you'll find way more than I could ever offer anything of value here. And again, that landscape continues to just explode. And increasingly, people are using these AI tools to build their own tools for internal use, right? So ChatGPT, for example, if you pay for a paid subscription, you can build your own GPT to really dive deeply and train that model to help you in specific tasks. So again, talk to Mark. He will be able to give you all kinds of great insights. But again, just want to sort of paint the landscape of what's possible for your work as extension professionals. Okay, so I'm going to take a break and get a drink of water. If you could wave a magic wand, what is one task you would love AI to help you with? And while you're thinking about that magical task you would love AI to help you with, I see that we have some great recommendations in the chat for other reading and study. So thank you all very much. That's fantastic. Those are all new ones for me, so I'm going to be really excited to check those out. I love the optimism in the room. I see, who is this? Let's see here. Making world peace. Jody, that is like the ultimate dream, isn't it? I would love that. Thank you for sharing that. Um, yes, Mark points out image generation needs some work, right? You have people who have third legs and, video that depicts, people walking through walls and all those kinds of things. I think we're going to be startled by how good this technology gets, how quickly, but absolutely, right? There's lots of work to be done, not just on the technical presentation and the beauty of it and the way it is compatible with the real world, but also the ethics of where they've harvested those photos and data from in the first place. Love it, Eric, writing a budget justification, absolutely. Creating my annual summary report using my Outlook calendar. Ooh, Jamie, yes, so you're getting into this idea of AI agents, right? So machines talking to each other and going out and performing tasks based on your instruction. I am really fascinated to watch that space and how that's going to help us. Managing staff, so much of it requires human interaction. Juliana, you raise an excellent point, right? It seems like there could be coaching opportunities through these tools. We already know that there's like a market for AI companions, so I won't get into that. I have some opinions about that, but AI can be a great like sounding board, right, and a decision-making partner. But the idea of using that for professional development, for management, and pairing that with very human-centered, relationship building, trust building, training, I think you're right that there's got to be a blend there. So thank you for that comment. Being adopted by Oprah, yes, I love that. I don't know if you mean literally like Oprah bringing you into her home or Oprah using AI, but in either case, I think both of those are really positive outcomes, Jennifer. So thank you for sharing that. Lit reviews, yes. Huge documents that I can't. We don't have hours and hours and days to go through these things and get actual value for the work that we're doing. I love that approach. Reporting and writing needs assessment. Haven't cracked the code, but hope we can integrate AI into our reporting system soon. Jesse, I love that. Amy, if AI can make extension a known brand, yes. Amy raises a great point, right? How will generative AI impact how people search for information and their access again to things they wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to? That's actually a really compelling use case. I love that, Amy. B. Gwen, facilitating innovation and disclosure. Love that. Oh, this is great. Okay. Patty says she saw a Penn State presentation around budget justifications for proposals. They can just put in a conference and it will go out and knows where it is, hotel costs, airline costs, per diem. Wow, that I've never heard of that. That's amazing, Patty. Thank you for sharing that. Would love to learn more. Mark, point a tool to a Google Drive folder, then ask it questions about the content in the folder. Yes, I love that. And then Jody, yes, I would be happy to do that, Jody. I will drop my email here in the chat and would love to visit further with you and anyone else about any of these topics. I will definitely geek out. Okay, 15 minutes left. Work and coach and personal fitness trainer. Yes, Reagan, thank you for being here. I know you got to run. But yes, I love that. I've actually used it for thinking about like a book launch. Like how do I detail all of those? Like what do I need to be thinking about from a marketing standpoint, or book signings, or whatever it might be. So yeah, lots of cases. Very exciting. Okay, so as Melanie points out, please go ahead in the chat. There is a survey we'd love for you to fill out for the Extension Foundation about your experience in today's session, right? This is part of an ongoing series. I want to make these valuable for you, and so I would love your feedback. We're going to get to the ethical framework here, I promise you. I will have my own survey in a moment, just a quick QR code, but we'll get to that in a moment. Please go ahead, if you don't mind, take a couple minutes and fill out that extension survey while you're listening in the background. Okay, so we all know, I think based on what I've seen in the chat, you all are very well aware that brainstorming, summarizing, templatizing, gap minding, right? What are we not thinking about? Help us to think this through. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, reframing, all of those things are uses for AI today. The question is, what about Extension's AI future? So here are 5 key questions. I'm going to leave you with this because I think it's helpful in how you move forward, right? As a system, as an individual professional, and everywhere in between. The first question I would raise for your consideration is, number 1, what are our ethical non-negotiables within Extension regarding AI, right? If IBM or Microsoft or the federal government or whoever does X, do we just go along with that and start using it right away? Like, what are the guardrails, right? How would we assess how this impacts our organization at Extension and our clients? And I think also it's a matter of how do we take a step beyond today, recognizing how rapidly the landscape is evolving, and think about in 6 months, right? I think it's important not just to think about this as a uniform, like I think that our ethical non-negotiable is that, we always sleep on it before we adopt a new tool. I think it's more than that. I think it's, what about 6 months from now? What about 12 months from now? What about 2 years from now? What do we want to be true? What will always be true about what Extension holds to be true and believes about humans' capacity for good and for problem solving and for helping our clients, regardless of what everybody else is doing, right? Sometimes what everybody else is doing is great, but it may not be in the best interest of society or Extension's clients. So you need to think about that. Second, should we proactively differentiate human tasks from machine tasks? Why or why not? So I saw this coming through in the chat several times, right? There are tasks that AI is really good at today, and that list is going to grow, right? It's undoubtedly going to grow. There are other things where it's really important for a human to be involved 100%, 75%. I saw someone talking about management, right? Working with people. In particular, as Extension works more with outside partners. Again, that's part of your legacy. You've done that for generations. As AI tools are able to come up with any image and any video, right? People's trust is already on the rocks. I suspect AI is going to make it even more challenging, right? How do you tell who's real, right? Actively within the last 12 months, there have been businesses that were deep faked over video and, released tens of millions of dollars to criminals because they thought they were in a Zoom room with their, CFO. And so if people are able to accomplish that kind of ill purpose today, thinking ahead to the election cycle, thinking ahead to implications for education, building trust, I am more convinced than ever that those hands skills, those human relationship skills, emotional intelligence, if you are investing in that today, you are doing yourself a favor because they're going to become so essential. The way we do those things may change with AI, but it's going to still be more important than ever before. Number 3, how could AI tool, fill in the blank, help our clients, and how could it harm them? And what don't we know yet, right? So really taking a thoughtful approach to thinking about all of the dimensions of new tools, new systems, new processes. I see that happening internally today at Extension, so I applaud you for that. And I think, again, you are increasingly, I suspect, going to get questions from your clients about these tools and should I be using them? How should I be using them? Really helping them think through and being a resource for them and a sounding board, I think is going to be essential. Number 4, what can we document and train on to help as many people as possible navigate AI, right? Again, because of the fact that these tools are so ubiquitous across every industry, across every academic discipline, across every layer of society, right? Those with limited education, those with extensive education, the fact that it's going to displace people who are highly trained as much or more than it will displace those who are working, with their hands or in traditional trades. These are all ramifications that the more you can document, resource, educate, outreach, again, not adding to your workload per se, but integrating that into the conversations that you're having, I think will be really, really important. And then finally, number 5, with whom can Extension partner to anchor its AI approach in research and reality? I know you are already thinking about this. There's a really great book I may have mentioned on a previous session called Who, Not How. And the premise of that book is basically that because of the way society changes so rapidly, not just in AI, but in every measure, the greatest leaps forward happen not because we took all this time to go and get a PhD in AI, but because we found people who already had the AI PhD and asked them the 3 questions that matter most to my specific client base. And so the more that you can think about people regionally, within your community, within your partner network, and then system-wide, people who can inform the ethical approach, people who can inform governance, people who can inform data privacy or these IP questions, or how do we raise the profile of Extension using AI tools? All of those and many more are very valid questions. But I think this type of a framework, and again, this is just 5 questions, I'm sure you have many others on your mind. I think this can be a starting point for creating a foundation that works from the local level up. Okay, so I'm going to skip a few slides forward. This is where I ask you for some feedback. So if you don't mind taking a minute to just scan the QR code or go to this URL, I would value your input. This is, again, separate and apart from Extension Foundation survey earlier. Please complete both. If you have time for only one, do the Extension Foundation survey and then come back to this. I'm going to pause now. We have 10 minutes left, and I want to open the floor to questions. So I'm going to take a drink of water. I'm going to check the chat. And then thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate your kind words and best wishes for being here. Okay, I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to look in the chat. And Melanie, feel free to chime in if there are questions that you saw come in that we need to talk about. Please let me know. I'll be happy to do that. Thank you so much for your attention, and now we'll dive into questions.
Thanks so much for all the information, Nate. Feel free to open your mic, raise your hand, chat. Like we said, we have like 10 more minutes, so please feel free to do so. So let's circle back to Pat's first question. Do you have any insight on using AI to translate?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Pat, I'll be honest, I have not used AI to translate to that. I mean, I've used, Google to find one word in another language, right? But I haven't done extensive research on translation. I know that's a really exciting field. So if you can, I dropped my email into the chat. If you'll shoot me an email, I'll be happy to do some digging and send you any resources. I can probably, based on some of the things I've listened to and looked at, it shouldn't take me very long to find some helpful resources. Obviously, I think I'll give you an example. Like I've worked with USDA and other partners on farmer-facing sort of conservation and climate-smart ag projects. And one of the things we ran into was in some communities, I'm thinking of, we were working with the Oaxacan community in California where a lot of produce is grown. And so there was a lot of concern among local agencies and leaders to like understand and respect culturally what's happening there, recognizing that they needed something different than just a simple Spanish translation, that they needed materials and resources framed that would resonate with them and be helpful to them. And so I think I see the need for it immediately, right? That's just a very specific example. I think that project also taught me that having that human intervention, I saw that's in the chat, I think in Lillian's comment, never losing sight of that human interaction. So she mentions, farmers and growers, continuing in-person visits. In a similar way, when you're thinking about translation tools, I would personally never trust ChatGPT. I bet it would do a pretty good job of taking, for example, something I wrote in English and translating it to Spanish. I would always want to get a second opinion because that is not, I don't have standing to say whether that's good Spanish or not, whether it resonates with the audience. And so I would, in any of the tools that exist or any of the research that's out there, I would always have someone in your back pocket you could go to and say, I know this person is a Spanish language or fill in the blank language expert. I hope I'm addressing the specific kind of where your head is at. But again, if you email me, I'm happy to look up some additional resources. But again, I think that point of using the tool, being wowed by it, and then verifying, sort of the journalistic credo of trust but verify, I think is really, really important, especially if it's a non-native language to you, because my experience has been like, I want to cultivate that trust. And to me, trust is almost more important, even if it's through an interpreter, a human interpreter. And then I can start maybe scaling my ability to communicate and use these tools to expedite that process. But I would always start, at least as I understand things today, from a foundation of that human trust. So I hope that's helpful. Okay. Let's see here. What other questions do we? I'm so glad to hear this has been valuable. Thank you, Jody. Oh, Jennifer says, people make the best translators. Machines do not speak the language of the people. They translate words, but it does not mean it's the right words for the group you're talking to. Absolutely, right? So there's so much, as we know from research, that is non language, right? Nonverbal, right? So much of our communication is nonverbal, is what I'm trying to say. Now, as technology, like we already know that Chat GPT and other tools are starting to be able to see the world, right? So see what's in a room behind you and make assumptions or decisions based on the things in your visual plane. I'm sure that will translate to audio at some point and video. So I don't know what the implications of that are. I know Chat GPT has already, or OpenAI has published videos of two AIs conversing to each other. So again, this space is changing rapidly, but I completely agree that the robot, as I call it, is not going to immediately know all of the nuances that are necessary to communicate clearly, number one, and number two, do so in a way that builds trust. So I think pairing people with machines makes a lot of sense. Okay, other questions, Melanie, that came through, or other thoughts from the group here?
Yeah, I thought this was an interesting comment. An ethical consideration for extension could never lose the value of real human interaction. For example, in-person visits to farmers and growers could be used instead of only webinars or video chat, making sure to reach people who can't access the internet or new AI
Mm.
tools.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. I appreciate the comment so much, because you're right. It is, there's so much, and I think I saw in the chat earlier, someone said one of the risks of AI is that we become lazy or dependent upon it, right? And that's true, just as true for me as it is for someone who's in elementary school and is trying to get a paper into their fifth grade teacher, right? Um, I think there is so much to be said for balancing when we use the tool and purposefully deciding when we don't, right? Um, and I think also being transparent about that, right? Someone mentioned earlier, it's often hard to know whether AI has been involved or not. I think extension has a really important role to play at transparency, right? Here are and maybe even it's sort of a behind the scenes look, like here's what we're finding value in, and here's what's not working, or here's when we would use this tool and when we wouldn't. Because you're not just, people getting work done, you're also educating, you're also building a sense of community, you're building a sense of civic engagement, you are helping people make decisions that affect their nutrition and so forth. So at any rate, I completely agree that there has to be a balance. And I think within the specific client bases that you serve, even making a list, like make this a journaling exercise, right? Like when would our clients really value AI? And if our clients knew we were using AI, what would give them confidence in the work of extension, and what would cause them to hesitate in trusting us? And just make a list, like freeform it, and see what comes up. Um, Ultimately, you're not going to know how your constituents feel about AI until you ask them. And so I guess that would be a final component before I stop and see if there are other questions. I would begin thinking about how to capture some initial data from specific client bases, right? So I saw farmers, for example, or people who don't have a lot of access to technology or these resources, or the business community in your local area, right? How are they thinking about these tools, and what would they like to see extension doing to help them navigate all of the unknowns that are in front of them? I think that could be really powerful. So I'll stop there. Yeah. Okay. So great point. So Pat points out this would imply being able to read, right? So some people may not even have that capacity. What if one is teaching a nutrition class to a group of Somali immigrants, and we do not have quick access to an interpreter? It's an equity issue. That's a great point. So yeah, I would have to give that one some thought, Pat, but you've raised an excellent point. I think it's situational dependent, right? If you're in a situation where you're talking about something that's important but also fairly neutral, like healthcare is really important, nutrition is really important, but it's not as polarizing as who are you voting for this fall, for example. Not that Extension would ever ask that question. But I think in that case, I might be more inclined to at least try integrating the AI tool, even if I wasn't an expert in that language, just to see, right? Because maybe that opens doors that you wouldn't have been able to use otherwise. To your point, you're right. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Recognize the risks of using the tool in any given circumstance. When it feels appropriate to do so, experiment and then learn from that and integrate that into your workflow the next time, right? So yeah, I love that example, and I think you're right. Like providing that equity, that access to information, even if someone doesn't speak the language you do, I think it'd be a really powerful use case. And again, you're going to figure out pretty quickly whether it's resonating or whether it's not working at all. All right. I know we have 1 minute left. Last call for questions. Oh, I see Lillian has one. Go ahead, Lillian.
Yes, hello. How are you doing, Nate? Thank you, everyone. Great presentation. I just wanted to add to the comment of being able to still, especially an extension in agriculture, to have personal contact with the people. I think that is also like the part of the farmers. Most of farmers are like 50 years old or older. So they are like, especially and particularly when you talk to them, like kind of letting behind all of these very transformative ways for AI integration. And that's not just a lose for them, it's also a lose for us because it should be a way to get a lot of the information and the knowledge that they have to expand us. And the more that the gap stand, the less of that knowledge that passed through us too. So
Yeah, thank you, Lillian, for that great comment, and that's a great way to wrap up. I think there's a generational component to this, right? There's as older clients maybe or other perspectives or backgrounds or have reservations about this technology. There may be ways to integrate other generations or other members of their business or team to really capture all of the great insights they have and also help you serve them better, right? I think you're right. There is a risk that people who are just don't want to use it or are hesitant, their businesses could be in jeopardy or their the best life they could live, right? Some of these tools could really help with that. And so finding ways to thread that needle and really engage diverse constituents in a way that's helpful to them could be really important. So thank you for raising that point. All right, I know we're out of time. Next time, I hope you'll join me July 18th, 1 to 2:15 Central. We'll be talking about diversifying funding sources. I'm really excited for the conversation. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy days. Hope your summer continues to go great, and I look forward to the next meeting. Take care, everyone. Back to you, Melanie.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. I put some links in the chat, and which will also be sent out to you in a follow-up email. But we have more opportunities in this series for the next few months. And we also, on Monday, we have a program center stage from the Extension Foundation on how we use and how we're helping Cooperative Extension use AI tools. So there's lots of links in the chat, and I know there was a lot of information shared today, so that will all be sent out to you. And thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you guys next time.